Thank you, Eric. And really, it's my pleasure to be here today to celebrate with you, to look back. It's been a really tough year for most of us. But again, I think we pay tribute to the resilience of the communities we work with, including of our supporters, of our volunteers, of our staff. So thank you from my side as well. So maybe just to begin, my name is Ruchi Tripathi. I'm originally from India, but living in the UK now. And I joined VSO 15 months ago. I've worked, quite passionate about, right to food and women's rights issues, as Eric said. What attracted me to VSO was really the work that VSO does, with volunteers. And it wasn't, for me, it wasn't until COVID that it really hit home to me, the important role that volunteers play in every aspect of our lives. I mean, coming from India, I saw how the migrant workers who walked for miles for days once India announced that lockdown last year in March, it wasn't the government who stepped up. It was ordinary people, it was volunteers who set out stalls to give shelter to the migrant workers, who provided food. In my own town, in Kent, in the UK, we have we have WhatsApp groups that have been set up by local communities who have been looking out for each other during the COVID pandemic, during this crisis. And I've been really inspired. I lived in South Africa, and coming back to the UK, really inspired by the community action that young people have been taking, be it the climate strikes or litter picking. And I don't think any of our work would be possible without volunteers and without the solidarity of communities. And that is really what inspired me and attracted me to VSO. And most of my work with VSO has been online, because I joined during the pandemic. But I did have the pleasure of meeting Ken, who you will hear from just after I speak. And Ken, is really inspiring. He's one of the youth champions and youth volunteers from Kenya who's been associated with VSO for a very long time. And I met him in the Glasgow Climate Summit recently. And, in many places where we went, after Ken spoke, people would just put their hands up and say, oh, I was a VSO volunteer 40 years ago. And it was just so heartwarming. So that's just a little bit about myself. Now, just coming to some of the, I'm trying to see if I can, it's here. Okay, perfect. So like I said, it's been a really tough year for most of us, but for the communities that VSO works with, it's been really, really difficult. The challenges that they face are multiple. They are at the forefront, at the front line. I think Eric mentioned the climate crisis. So the communities that VSO works with are at the front line of the climate crisis. They have been impacted the most. There has been huge loss of livelihoods because of the climate crisis. Women are really suffering. They've had to walk much longer to look for food. There has been increased, their increased care responsibilities for women. Farmers that communities we work with are really struggling with crop failures. In Kenya, you had the huge locust, attack, which was really increased because of the climate crisis. And remember, the climate crisis is coming on top of COVID. So we are really not out of the COVID crisis. So this is just compounding the impact that communities are facing. You see what's going on in northern Nigeria or northern Ethiopia, the conflict that has resurfaced. Large parts of it is because of the pressures that communities are facing because of worsening climate. I touched briefly around women's rights. I mean, the other sad reality of the COVID crisis and climate has been the increased cases of violence against women and girls that has that is just increasing over the past, because of these crises. Many women were locked in their homes, were facing violence. Many children and girls were locked in their homes because of the lack of jobs as well. Women were often at the forefront of that. Of course, women have faced increased care and domestic work burden. And in many, many countries, unfortunately, what we are seeing is a rollback on women's rights. So the protections that women had fought for and the gender equality and the progress towards that, we are seeing it being rolled back in a number of countries, and that's quite worrying. Again, one of the features of the COVID crisis, as well as climate, has been impact on livelihoods. So this is from the International Labour Organization. Nearly half of the global workforce is at risk of losing their livelihoods. And remember, communities, informal workers don't have huge amounts of assets or savings. So they are really living on the basis of their daily wage that they are earning. So if the loss of livelihoods really is devastating for them and their families. We know about the precarious, temporary, seasonal nature of work in many of our countries, including in the global north, where we've heard about fruit pickers and the conditions that they are in. You've seen this perhaps in Netherlands as well. And so again, I think this is what the communities we work with are facing. Finally, I think for me personally, what is absolutely shocking is that in 2021, we still have 12% of the global population that is not able to have 2 meals a day. People who are going to bed hungry every single day. It's shocking. I mean, the world has enough food, yet people are going hungry. And the number of people going hungry was going down over the past many years, but because of conflict, climate, and COVID, it has just skyrocketed. And again, I think this is the context we face. So just briefly now to talk about what is VSO doing about this. So VSO, as you know, we are really taking our volunteering for development approach to scale through global programs. We work through a blend of community, national, international volunteers with partners. And I wanted to highlight 4 quick examples before I end around some of the work we have done on food, in particular around food security. One of the things that communities were telling us last year when we did surveys, to really see how VSO would respond to the COVID crisis, was that they did not have access to food because of lack of livelihoods and markets closing, lockdowns. People lost access to food. So VSO, in that instance, provided small cash and food grants to the most vulnerable communities, just to tide them over. Of course, this was a short-term measure, and building on and really what VSO then again did was really deepened its work on food and really invested in this from a programmatic perspective. So we worked in 9 countries through community volunteers, through youth volunteers, in really supporting local communities to really ramp up their own work on food, to demand better provisions from governments, better policies, as well as better farming practices. In Nepal, again, one of the things that I'm really proud of that VSO community volunteers did was to bring to life the Right to Food Act that the government had. In many countries in the global north, when COVID happened, if people weren't able to work, they were provided with furlough schemes and they had some access to some grants from the government. This wasn't the case in developing countries. And in order to access those government schemes, you need to have a registration. You need to be registered with the government. So what the community volunteers did in these 4 municipalities was really working with the farmer organizations, as well as started supporting farmers to register, right? To be registered with the local community so that they will be able to access government schemes in the future. And I think this is, really, really crucial as we will face many more disasters in the future. The next country that we worked in was Bangladesh. And again, in Bangladesh, the community volunteers, through a survey, identified that that farmers did not really have an understanding of how to produce food safely. So in Bangladesh, what was interesting was that the farmers said that there was enough food, but it wasn't produced in a sustainable manner. There were huge amounts of chemicals and pesticides. And one of the problems that Bangladesh faces is arsenic poisoning because of what's happening with the water there as well. So what VSO did was really supported communities to start producing in a sustainable manner without chemicals, without fertilizers, without chemical fertilizers. And really this was of benefit to the consumers. And this was the key demand from the local consumers as well. So here you see Sophia Khatun, who VSO supported and worked with from a local farmer organization. And she then now, she has been able to increase her production and to be able to sell in the local market. We also tied up with the local government, who were able to set up a shop for safe food promotion. The next example is from Zimbabwe. Again, one of the key challenges that farmers are facing is not having access to seeds that are climate resilient. So in this instance, what VSO has done, working with our partner, is a community seed bank to preserve indigenous varieties of seeds, which will be really necessary in the future, now and in the future, both from a resilience perspective and nutrition. So again, really trying to think of some of these resilience approaches that are really, really crucial. My final slide and final example is from Philippines. And this is, this is from Mindanao, which is a region which is at the forefront of the climate and ecological crisis. This is a community that has been war-torn for many years. There has been a conflict in this region. They have recently signed a peace accord. And one of the ways of really keeping the peace is by ensuring that the communities have secure livelihoods. So what VSO has been doing is, again, working with our Fragile Communities program and working on the basis of our community risk assessments that community volunteers had carried out. One of the needs that was identified was, again, investment in livelihoods and food security. So what VSO volunteers did was they worked with ex-combatants in this area and the local communities to start producing biofertilizers. So in the picture here, you see women using water lilies. And water lilies was a huge problem for the rivers, for the waterways. It was basically blocking the waterways, but it was very helpful as a biofertilizer. So they started producing this to use in their farming. And they also set up a local rice production and rice selling shop. They now have ecotourism plants. This area is very rich in biodiversity and for bird watching. So they are trying to also change the image of this region through some of the interventions on resilience and food security. And I think you will really understand how important that is for a community that is just coming out of conflict. So this is just to give you a flavor of some of the work VSO is doing through the support of community, national and international volunteers, remote volunteers over the past year.